Hey everybody, we're live and on location, another episode of the CJ Video Podcast. Austin Meek and Kevin Haskin podcasting today from the Capital Journal Radio Studios. If you listen to the old podcast, this is where all the magic happened, right here in this room.
It was. It was quite the spot. Jim Cates when he was in command.
Yeah. So this is where all multimedia projects go to die. And we're hoping that's the case with this. Come up here and this is the last time we'll have to do this thing.
I'm thinking this machine coffee is where coffee goes to die, but...
I got the extra anthrax today, so I'm feeling good.
You got the whitener?
Yeah.
Good.
Well, we're here to break down the Sunflower Showdown. K-State and KU play tonight, 8 o'clock, Bramlage Coliseum. Earl, you were down in Austin, Texas this weekend and watched a game that I'm sure... gave Frank Martin quite a test in his no profanity lifestyle. Yeah. That had to be quite a gut-wrenching defeat for K-State.
Yeah, not a good second half performance. Texas came out and played well, got the crowd into it as much as a crowd gets into it in Austin for basketball, but K-State just couldn't find the shooters that it was finding in the first half, and defensively allowed Texas too many points off the dribble, and Texas was getting a lot of fouls off that. K-State didn't get any hardly, and 28-0 difference on free throws in the second half.
Yeah, it was a pretty familiar script for K-State. I mean, it had to be pretty similar to that game they lost at Iowa State. They had the double-digit lead, and then it came down to, I'm sure, some foul calls that K-State fans probably hoped would go the other way. If Frank wasn't swearing, I bet there were a lot of K-State fans that were watching that second half on TV.
Yeah, and in Kansas State, in the Iowa State game, I thought they were getting to the basket and really driving the ball. Rodney McGruder barely touched the ball in the second half in Austin, and Will Spradling didn't have many looks either after both of them scored 11 first half points. You get after those two, and some of the offensive, there's some limitations on that team in terms of offense. And Adrian Diaz was actually on the floor for 29 minutes because Frank likes what he's getting out of him offensively better than the other big men.
I think back to the first time K-State played Texas. It was a close game, and a rare close game that K-State actually finished and was able to win, although they blew a big lead in that game too. And Rodney McGruder had a great game, 30-some points. And at that point, it seemed like K-State had discovered its leader and its go-to guy. But it seems like since then, that's something that K-State hasn't had. Does it seem like this is a team that really needs somebody to step up and take command?
Yeah, it does. And you don't know how much maybe that toe is bothering McGruder either in terms of maybe what kind of first step he can get on a defender, or how open he can get, some clearance from a defender. I didn't see K-State really screening that well for him in the second half of that game either, and they just basically got to take him to him. And I think part of that too is when you build that 13-point lead at halftime, and you're feeling pretty good about yourselves, you're thinking the second half's going to go your way too, and then all of a sudden you get ambushed, and you're having a hard time getting back in sync and figuring out what will work for you.
I heard a little bit of Frank Martin after the game, and there was one thing he said that stuck with me about how people are going to talk about everything K-State did wrong and what K-State did to lose the game, but he thought it was more about what Texas did in protecting its home court, which is a point he's made quite a bit about. I mean, he said it's nearly impossible to win on the road in the Big 12, and every time I hear that, I have to scratch my head a little bit because look at Oklahoma. Oklahoma went into Bramlage Coliseum and beat K-State earlier this year. I mean, it is possible to win on the road in the Big 12. It's almost like K-State has built that up to be such an impossible task that even when you're ahead by 14 points in the second half, you're thinking, boy, we're playing on the road. It's so hard to win on the road. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy where you psych yourself up so much about the challenge of playing on the road. And I guess the corollary to that is, if it really is almost impossible to win on the road in the Big 12, K-State's got no excuse for not winning this game tonight. They're on their home court. If that's the story, that teams win on their home court in the Big 12, and K-State better take care of it tonight.
Well, and you look up the record, and it's not impossible. Frank Martin is 18-20 in his time as the K-State head coach in Big 12 road games. So, the Wildcats have obviously done it before, and are capable of, I think, still doing it if they just protect the lead, find ways to maybe milk the clock and also get a shot and get something a guy can hit. But they couldn't do it at Iowa State, and legitimately didn't get calls up there that probably should have gone their way. At Texas, I just don't think they were aggressive enough offensively or even on defense in the second half. It was pretty much a collapse, and yeah, Longhorns had something to do with that, obviously, but I'm not sure they were that good to double K-State in points in the second half.
One thing I think Bill Self is really good at is dispelling some of this hocus pocus that people buy into about basketball, these ideas that people have. I mean, he said straight up, people talk about how hard it is to win on the road in a hostile environment. KU was up 8 points with 3 minutes to go at Missouri, and should have won that game. I think that attitude has helped Kansas, because I was down there for the game when KU played at Baylor. KU wasn't intimidated to go play on the road. KU never is. And it didn't matter that game was on Baylor's home floor. KU went out and just dominated that game from start to finish. Now, Baylor, I think we all realize now is I think I call them softer than old fruit in my column. That team is just doesn't seem to have the fortitude when they play the best teams in the Big 12 to stand up to them. But still, that was a pretty impressive win for Kansas, especially because we saw a side of Jeff Withey that we haven't seen this year, and then he continued that Saturday against Oklahoma State.
Right, and I'll be curious to see what Withey does tonight. I mean, he's going against guys that can pound you and can be physical, and I think Kansas State is going to get a little bit of that back tonight, playing in front of a home crowd, and it's got to be as juiced as for any game of the season, because the crowd will be as good as it is all year in Bramlage. So I'll be curious to see how Withey does against that kind of, in that atmosphere, and see what he accomplishes. The thing about Baylor that intrigues me, I think it's a good win too, from the standpoint that I think some of these conference coaches really know how to prepare for Baylor and can get the right things done, especially against that zone. Still wouldn't surprise me if Baylor is a tough out in the NCAA tournament, just because they're a little different preparation, and the length that Baylor has. They might go on another run like they did when they got to the Elite Eight a couple of years ago. We'll see. Maybe not. That might be a stretch the way they've played, particularly against Kansas and Missouri, but we'll see.
It's true that coaches in the Big 12 kind of have that scouting report figured out on Baylor,
right.
Which is...
And I think you're seeing some of that with K-State here.
Yeah.
I really do. They prepare teams as if, when they play K-State, as if they're going to war. I hate to use that analogy, but every single coach in the league talks about how they're the toughest team in America, and right now, frankly, K-State isn't.
They're getting by on reputation with that a little bit right now. Yeah. And I think, like you said, that almost, psychologically, that almost helps your opponent prepare, because they go into that game thinking, man, we're playing the toughest team in America right now, so we got to bring it. And if K-State's not that, if they're not living up to that reputation, then you got another team that's, has a psychological edge on you. And KU's going into this game expecting that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every team in the Big 12 does, and so far K-State hasn't been able to bring it. Why? Well, some of it has to do with youth, some of it has to do with lack of leadership. There isn't anyone that's grabbing this team and saying, hey, you've got to really, you do have to bring it. And you're not seeing it out of, say, a senior, Jamar Samuels, who I've always liked that kid, and He's a good kid. Down deep, I think when you talk to him, he's an enjoyable kid to talk to, and you kind of feel for him in a way, and wish this senior season was going a little better. But he's got to be responsible for that himself too.
So if KU wins tonight, the Jayhawks win out and get a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, if they win out, I think that's entirely possible. I think how much those losses in non-conference weigh against them, I guess we'd have to wait and see. Particularly maybe the Davidson defeat.
Yeah, that's the one that sticks out.
Yeah, but I think it's a distinct possibility, particularly if they can win the conference tournament.
You look at KU's schedule. This is the toughest road game probably they've got left. They've got to go to Oklahoma State, which can be a tough place to play. But we saw Saturday that KU seems to match up pretty well with Oklahoma State.
Mm-hmm.
They got to go to A&M, but A&M's not doing a whole lot for me. So this does look like the game, aside from that little tilt in Lawrence when Missouri visits.
Right.
This looks like the game, maybe the hurdle to clear for KU if they do want to win out and win the conference.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too, and yet it's a much bigger hurdle for Kansas State with this 4-game stretch that's upcoming here against teams and trails in the Big 12.
I'll be honest, when the line came out, it was something like KU by 2.5. The reason why I don't do this was I would have gambled my entire life savings on KU in that game. But it did make me think about last year when it was kind of a similar situation where we went into that game saying KU should be favored by way more than this. Is this a potential game where you see K-State doing something that people aren't expecting right now?
If it is, I'd be surprised, because I don't see a player on that team right now that can will K-State to a win like Jacob Pullen could last year with his 38-point performance. And really, the one guy who could maybe is Rodney Magruder, and I've said all along, he's not the same go-to type guy that Jacob Pullen became for K-State down the stretch last year. I mean, you remember back to Pullen and saying, the whole NIT quote. Well, that was all about getting that team psyched so it wouldn't fall into the NIT. And now we're coming off a road game where no player even talks for K-State. So, to me, it's almost a completely different set of circumstances, set of players, and I'd really be surprised if somebody could pull off that kind of performance.
All right, give me your pick. Who you got tonight?
I'm going to go with KU, and I think by 10.
I'm going to take the Jayhawks too. I'll take them by single digits. I think K-State maybe hangs with them for a half or maybe into the final 10 minutes or so. But I think KU hangs on and wins it 77-70. All right, get your prop there. Got to wave that little.
Oh, is that after?
K-State fans, send us your hate mail.
Yeah, we love it.
Go
we
Hawks.
Love it. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll be back next week.